My mother-in-law banished me and my 3 daughters to a tiny room beside the laundry, constantly reminding me, a woman who can't give this family a son has no value. The morning she humiliated me before 40 charity donors, a billionaire quietly removed his suit jacket, wrapped it around my shivering girls, and declared they're leaving with me. Consider yourself lucky I didn't put all 4 of you in an orphanage. 3 daughters are nothing but a dead end for the family name. Margaret Whitmore delivered those words with icy contempt before striking me across the face. The slap echoed through the grand dining hall. I nearly lost my balance, the silver serving tray shaking violently in my hands as delicate porcelain cups crashed onto the polished marble floor. The room instantly fell silent. Nearly 40 wealthy donors watched without saying a word. Only one guest reacted. My name is Emily Carter. At 32, I had spent the last 6 years living inside the Whitmore mansion, not as family, but as unpaid labor. After my husband Michael Whitmore died in a tragic accident on Interstate 84, Margaret insisted he had left behind crushing debts. According to her, I owed the Whitmore family everything. She seized our townhouse. She claimed Michael's life insurance. She even took the jewelry my own mother had left me. In return, she allowed my daughters and me to sleep in a cramped storage, a room beside the mansion's laundry equipment. My daughters, Olivia 8, Grace 6, and little Lily only 4. I rarely heard their own names inside that house. Margaret referred to them only as the 3 disappointments. In her eyes, my greatest failure was never giving Michael a son. Long before sunrise that morning, I had already been working. At 4:30 a.m., I prepared breakfast for the catering staff, polished every crystal glass, vacuumed the reception rooms, arranged fresh flowers, set tables for an elegant charity luncheon benefiting abused women through the Whitmore Foundation. Guests praised speeches about kindness and compassion, while the woman hosting the event treated me worse than hired help. Among those attending was Richard Bennett, the billionaire founder of one of America's largest private hospital systems. The press described him as brilliant, reserved, and almost impossible to know. After losing his mother as a child, he never married and rarely appeared at public events. His donations funded much of the Whitmore Foundation. The moment Margaret slapped me, Richard quietly placed his wine glass on the table. His voice remained calm. "So this is your version of discipline?" Margaret smiled effortlessly. "Emily is family. She simply needs firm guidance. She's always had a talent for manipulating people." I touched my split lip. I'm only considered family when someone needs the floors scrubbed. The rest of the time, I'm treated like a servant who doesn't even receive a paycheck. Margaret lifted her hand again before she could strike me. Richard stepped directly between us. "My financial support ends today." Every conversation in the room stopped. Margaret stared at him. "You'd destroy years of charitable work over one bitter woman." Richard's eyes briefly settled on the bruises, visible beneath my sleeves, before returning to her. "I'm not destroying your foundation. I'm refusing to support people who preach compassion while practicing cruelty." For the first time all afternoon, Margaret's confidence faltered. She immediately ordered security to throw me out. Terror flooded my chest. My daughters were still upstairs. Margaret had locked them inside a guest bedroom because, in her words, children ruin sophisticated gatherings. I turned toward the staircase, but Richard spoke again. His voice was steady. "You want to be leaving alone." He looked directly at me.
"You
"And your daughters are coming with me?" The entire room stood frozen in stunned silence. Margaret actually laughed. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in." "I know exactly what I'm seeing," Richard answered. He climbed the stairs himself. Minutes later, he returned carrying Lily while Olivia held his hand. Grace clung tightly to my side. Outside, heavy rain poured across the circular driveway. Richard removed his tailored suit jacket, wrapped it around all 3 girls, and led us to his CUV. Without looking back, Margaret screamed after us, "She's a thief. Those are my son's granddaughters. You'll regret this. My name's Emily Carter." For 6 years, I believed my life had ended the day my husband Michael Whitmore died. Instead of mourning with me, his mother, Margaret Whitmore, took everything. She said Michael had left enormous debts and that I should be grateful she allowed me and my daughters to stay under her roof. She sold our townhouse. She claimed every dollar from Michael's life insurance. She even took the necklace my late mother had given me, saying family assets belonged to the Whitmores now. In return, she locked me and my daughters inside a tiny room beside the laundry. Every morning before sunrise, I cleaned the mansion-cooked meals, washed clothes, polished silver, and served guests well. Margaret reminded me that I had no value because I never gave Michael a son. Olivia, Grace, and Lily grew up believing whispers were safer than laughter. Whenever they accidentally made noise, Margaret would punish them by making them skip dessert or locking them inside the storage room for hours. I hated myself for not protecting them. The day Richard Bennett walked into that charity luncheon, everything changed. After wrapping his jacket around my daughters, he opened the SUV door and quietly said, "You are safe now." I burst into tears before I even sat down. No one had spoken those words to me in years. Richard drove us to a beautiful house overlooking the river. It was large, but surprisingly warm. No marble statues, no servants staring at us, only a smiling elderly woman waiting at the entrance. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Hayes," Richard said. She practically raised me. Mrs. Hayes knelt in front of my daughters. "Would anyone like hot chocolate?" The girls looked at me for permission. When I nodded, they rushed into her arms. That was the first time I had seen them smile without fear. Richard gave us guest rooms and insisted we stay as long as necessary. For the next few days, doctors examined my daughters. The bruises on Olivia's wrists shocked them. Grace was severely underweight. Little Lily had nightmares every single night. When the pediatric psychologist asked where the bruises came from, Olivia quietly answered, "Grandma said girls should learn pain because life never loves daughters." The room became completely silent. Richard walked outside without saying a word. Later that evening, he returned carrying several thick folders. "Emily," he said, "I asked my legal team to investigate your husband's estate. Something doesn't add up." I stared at him in confusion. He opened the first folder. Michael never had debt, not even one unpaid loan. I felt the room spin. "What?" Richard pushed another document toward me. "Your husband's life insurance paid $5 million. Margaret collected every cent 3 weeks after his funeral." Another folder revealed ownership records. The townhouse was never sold to pay creditors. Margaret secretly transferred it into a trust controlled by herself. Then came bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds. Every document proved the same horrifying truth. Margaret had stolen everything. My knees gave out. For 6 years, I believed I had ruined my husband's legacy. Instead, his own mother had robbed his widow and children. Richard quietly placed another document in front of me. There was one more surprise. Michael updated his will 6 months before he died. The attorney who prepared it mysteriously retired the week after Michael's funeral. Richard looked directly into my eyes. That lawyer never retired. He disappeared. The original will has been missing ever since. My heart pounded. "What was in it?" Richard answered calmly. "Everything was supposed to belong to you and your daughters, not Margaret." For the first time since Michael died, I realized something. His death had never been the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Meanwhile, inside the Whitmore mansion, Margaret watched the sins. Evening news expecting another successful charity event to increase her reputation. Instead, every television station showed cell phone videos recorded by stunned donors. The footage captured the slap, her cruel words, Richard Bennett walking away, and 3 frightened little girls wrapped inside his expensive suit jacket. By midnight, the Whitmore Foundation had lost millions of dollars in donations. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Sponsors canceled partnerships. Social media called Margaret the cruel grandmother. She smashed crystal glasses across her office, screaming that Emily had destroyed everything. She had no idea. The real battle had not even started. Richard's legal team had already filed emergency court motions to recover Michael's stolen estate, and hidden inside one forgotten safety deposit box was evidence powerful enough to destroy the Whitmore family forever. 3 days later, Richard's legal team gathered around a long conference table. Every file collected over the past week pointed to one conclusion. Margaret Whitmore had spent 6 years hiding the truth. The missing will was still nowhere to be found. But another discovery changed everything. A private investigator hired by Richard located Michael's former attorney. His name was Daniel Harris. He had not retired. He had been living quietly in a small town under another name. When Richard and I met him, he looked exhausted. The moment he saw Michael's photograph, tears filled his eyes. "I have carried this guilt for 6 years," he whispered. Daniel admitted Margaret had threatened to ruin his career after Michael's funeral. She demanded the original will. When he refused, she bribed one of his employees to steal it from the office vault. Fearing for his family, Daniel resigned and disappeared. But before leaving, he had secretly scanned every page. His trembling hands pulled out a flash drive. "This is the only copy left." Richard immediately handed it to his legal team. Minutes later, the document appeared on a large screen. Michael's final wishes were unmistakable. Every property, every investment, every business share, everything belonged to Emily Carter and our 3 daughters. Margaret was supposed to receive only a modest monthly allowance. I covered my mouth and cried. Michael had protected us. Margaret had stolen our future. Richard looked at me. "This changes everything." The very next morning, attorneys filed a lawsuit demanding the return of every stolen asset. The court approved an emergency order freezing Margaret's bank accounts. News spread across the city within hours. Television stations reported that the respected chairwoman of the Whitmore Foundation was being investigated for fraud, theft, and financial abuse. Board members immediately voted to remove her from every leadership position. Donors demanded their money back. Meanwhile, Margaret stormed into her lawyer's office. "Fix this," she shouted. "I own everything." Her lawyer slowly placed the court order in front of her. "No, Margaret. According to the evidence, you never did." That afternoon, court officers arrived at the Whitmore mansion. Luxury cars, expensive artwork, bank records, jewelry. Even the mansion itself was placed under legal control until ownership could be determined. Margaret watched in disbelief as officials sealed rooms she once ruled with absolute authority. For the first time in years, she had no power. That evening, Olivia walked into Richard's library carrying a small drawing. She handed it to him shyly. It showed 4 people holding hands. Me, Olivia, Grace, Lee, and Richard standing beside us beneath a bright sun. At the top, she had written 5 simple words. "Our hero found us at last." Richard smiled, but his eyes became watery. He carefully framed the picture instead of putting it away. For the first time since Michael died, hope no longer felt impossible. But none of us knew Margaret still had one final secret, and she was willing to risk everything to keep it buried. The first court hearing filled every seat in the courtroom. Reporters lined the hallway. Former donors whispered as Margaret Whitmore entered wearing an expensive designer suit and a look of confidence that no longer fooled anyone. She glanced at me and smiled coldly. "You still think you can beat me?" I said nothing. Richard sat beside me. His legal team had spent weeks uncovering every hidden transaction connected to Michael's estate. When the judge called the case to order, the evidence began piling up. Bank transfers, property records, insurance payments, forged signatures. One by one, they painted the same picture. Margaret had lied from the very beginning. Then Margaret's attorney stood. "Your Honor, these accusations are based on incomplete records. There is no proof Mrs. Whitmore intentionally committed fraud." Richard's lead attorney calmly walked to the judge. "There is one more witness. Please call Thomas Reed." A gray-haired man entered the courtroom. I recognized him immediately. He had been Michael's personal accountant for nearly 15 years. Thomas raised his right hand and took the oath. He looked directly at Margaret. "I warned you this day would come." The courtroom fell silent. Thomas explained that Michael secretly asked him to keep copies of every financial record because he feared someone inside the family would try to steal his estate if anything ever happened to him. After Michael's death, Margaret demanded access to those records. When Thomas refused, she fired him and threatened to destroy his reputation. But he never destroyed the copies. Instead, he locked them inside a private safety deposit box. Today, he handed every document to the court. The judge carefully reviewed the files. Every transaction matched Richard's investigation perfectly. Margaret's face turned pale. Then came the biggest surprise of all. Thomas produced a sealed envelope addressed in Michael's handwriting. The judge opened it. Inside was a personal letter. My voice shook as the judge began reading aloud. "If you are hearing this letter, it means I am no longer alive. Emily, if anything happens to me, never believe anyone who tells you. I left you with debt. Everything I built was for you and our daughters. They are my greatest pride. Never let anyone make them feel less valuable because they were born girls." Tears streamed down my face. Olivia reached for my hand. Grace quietly rested her head on my shoulder. Little Lily whispered, "Daddy loved us." I nodded through my tears. More than anything, Margaret suddenly stood. "That letter is fake. Michael would never write that." The judge looked at her sternly. "A handwriting expert has already confirmed its authenticity. Please sit down." Margaret collapsed into her chair. For the first time, everyone saw fear in her eyes. After a short recess, the judge returned with a temporary ruling. All Whitmore assets connected to Michael's estate would immediately be transferred into a court-supervised trust until the final judgment. Margaret was ordered to vacate the mansion within 30 days. As we walked outside, reporters surrounded us. No one asked Margaret a single question. Every microphone was pointed toward me. I looked at my daughters. Then I answered softly. "This case has never been about money. It has always been about giving my girls the life their father wanted them to have." Richard smiled quietly beside us. But before we reached the car, his phone rang. He listened for a few seconds. His expression changed. He looked at me. "Emily, there's something else the investigators just discovered. Michael's car accident may not have been an accident after all." Richard ended the call slowly. His face had lost all color. I felt my heart racing. "What happened?" He looked at me before answering. "The state investigators reopened Michael's accident. Someone found evidence that was ignored 6 years ago." I could barely breathe. "Ignored?" Richard nodded. "Every single day." Grace hugged Lily tightly. Richard quietly handed me a small wooden box investigators had recovered from Michael's personal office. Inside was a handwritten note. "Emily, if anything ever happens to me, promise me one thing. Teach our daughters they never have to apologize for being born girls. They are stronger than anyone knows." I held the letter against my heart. For 6 long years, Margaret had tried to erase Michael's love. Instead, the truth had finally brought him back into our lives. But the investigation was not over. The detectives believed Margaret had not acted alone. Someone else had helped plan Michael's death. And that person's name was about to shock us all. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. It was Detective Sarah Collins. "Emily, we need you and Richard at the police department immediately. We have identified the second person involved." My hands began to shake. Richard drove without saying a word. When we arrived, the detectives led us into a private conference room. A photograph lay face down on the table. Detective Collins took a deep breath. We traced the recovered messages and financial transfers. Margaret did not act alone. She slowly turned the photograph over. I gasped. It was David Whitmore, Michael's older cousin, the man who had comforted me at Michael's funeral, the man who told me he would always protect my daughters. I felt sick. No, that can't be true. The detective slid several documents across the table. David had secretly become vice president of Whitmore Holdings just 2 months after Michael's death. Within a year, he received millions of dollars through shell companies controlled by Margaret. Richard looked at the bank records. They paid him to help cover everything up. Investigators also recovered emails showing David arranged for Michael's SUV to be serviced at a garage owned by one of his close friends just days before the crash. The mechanic had already confessed. David ordered the brake line to be cut. In exchange, he was promised control of the Whitmore family business. An arrest warrant was issued immediately. Police surrounded David's luxury home, but he was gone. His private jet had taken off less than an hour earlier. For the next 48 hours, every news channel covered the manhunt. Then came the breakthrough. David's jet landed in Canada, where local authorities detained him based on the U.S. warrant, while extradition proceedings began. Weeks later, he was returned to face trial. The courtroom was silent as the evidence was presented. The mechanic testified, the accountant testified, phone records, financial transfers, recovered messages. Everything pointed to David and Margaret. Finally, David stood to testify. At first, he denied everything. Then prosecutors played one final recording recovered from Margaret Delve's old cell phone. David's voice filled the courtroom. Once Michael is gone, everything belongs to us. Emily will never know the truth. David lowered his head. There was nothing left to deny, he confessed. Margaret remained silent. The jury returned after only a few hours, guilty on every major charge. Margaret and David were both sentenced to long prison terms. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us once again. This time I smiled, not because justice erased the pain, but because my daughters would never again live in fear. A month later, the court officially returned Michael's estate to us. The townhouse, the investments, the insurance money, everything that had been stolen. Richard handed Olivia the keys to the restored family home. She looked up at me. "Mun, are we really going home?" I wrapped all three girls in my arms. Yes, this time, forever. As we walked through the front door, I noticed one last envelope waiting on the dining table. It had been hidden inside a wall during the home's renovation. On the front were 5 familiar words written in Michael's handwriting. For my girls opened together. None of us knew that what was inside would change our future one more time. The four of us gathered around the dining table. Richard stood quietly nearby. Olivia carefully opened the envelope while Grace and Lily held my hands. Inside was another sealed letter. Beneath it rested a small silver key. Michael's handwriting covered the first page. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally won. I prayed every day that you and our daughters would one day be free. Never allow anyone to convince our girls they are less valuable because they were born daughters. They are the greatest gift God ever gave me." By the time I finished reading, we were all crying. Then Olivia picked up another document. "Mun, what's this?" It was a certificate for a private trust. Richard examined it carefully. "Emily, Michael created this trust 6 months before he died. The silver key belongs to a safety deposit box." The next morning, we visited the bank. A manager unlocked the vault and handed me a small metal box. Inside were family photographs, home videos, birthday cards the girls had made for Michael. There was also a thick folder marked, "For their future." Richard opened it carefully. Inside were investment records worth nearly $20 million. Michael had quietly built the trust for one purpose: to pay for Olivia, Grace, and Lily's education. There was even a handwritten note beside each account. "Olivia, never stop asking questions. Grace, your kindness will change lives. Lee, keep making people smile." My daughters hugged the letters against their hearts. For the first time, they truly knew how deeply their father had loved them. Weeks later, we held a small memorial service at Michael's favorite lakeside park. Only close friends attended. Richard stood beside us as each girl released a white flower into the water. Olivia smiled through tears. Daddy kept his promise. He still takes care of us. I looked toward the sky. Thank you, Michael. Months passed. Life slowly became peaceful. Olivia returned to school full of confidence. Grace joined in an art club. Lily finally slept through the night without nightmares. I also rebuilt my own life. Using part of the recovered estate, I created the Michael Whitmore Family Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide safe housing, legal assistance, and education for widows and children escaping abuse. The first family we welcomed reminded me of myself 6 years earlier. This time I was the one opening the door. Richard continued supporting the foundation. One evening after a charity event, he asked me to walk through the garden. He looked nervous for the first time since we met. "Emily, when I helped you that rainy afternoon, I thought I was saving one family. Instead, you and your girls gave my life a family I never believed I would have." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Olivia, Grace, and Lily watched from the porch holding their breath. Richard knelt down. "Emily Carter, will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes. Before I could answer, Lily shouted happily, "Please say yes, Mom." Grace laughed. Olivia smiled. Dad would want us to be happy. I looked at Richard, then at my daughters. Finally, I whispered the easiest word I had spoken in years. "Yes." The girls ran toward us cheering as Richard slipped the ring onto my finger. For the first time since Michael's death, our home was filled not with fear, but with hope. And that hope became the beginning of a brand new chapter for all of us. The end. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were? Emily, your support inspires us to bring more powerful stories. Thank you for watching.